In emergency management, the definition of a stakeholder is any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival or recovery of a given community.
This is the Stakeholder Prepping Podcast, where the tactical comes from the practical, and today, you become your own stakeholder.
Here are your hosts, Chris and AC.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you, yes, you are the stakeholder in your own survival. And AC, I'm super into this episode. This one's really cool to me just because of how different it is. So what are we talking about today?
Yeah, this is going to be fun. We are going to talk about alternate bug out and escape routes. And honestly, a lot of people will say, I'm just never bugging out, so I don't need to know this stuff. And I get that because I kind of find myself in the same camp that, dude, I'm just never bugging out. But what if you're not at home? You're not always going to be at home forever. What if you're on vacation or you're traveling for work? Or you're even just downtown at dinner with some friends and family? You may need an alternate bug out route to get home. And this is practice your pace model, right? Have that, how you're going to get home. You've got a primary freeway, but if that is blocked, you may need an alternate and a contingency and an emergency. And I think this episode is really focused probably on the last two. So,
I would agree with that. And yeah, even if you don't have a vehicle, if you can't find a bicycle, the Lamborghinis always work. So
drop top Nikes, baby.
Yeah, I mean, you've got enough shoe leather to get you to where you're going, get moving. And on that note, it's actually important to note that fitness is a big part of this. If you can't walk from wherever you are to home, just because of a fitness issue, that's not on anyone but you. That's entirely up to you to make sure that you can carry your pack, that it's not overloading everything in your knees so they explode on step 2. You have to be able to walk around the block, and maybe this episode is what kind of spurs some of our listeners to get into better shape. I've been trying to, and it's been going about as well as trying to put the cats back in the bag, but trying to get fit is a critical part of this. So are good shoes. If your drop top Nikes or your Lamborghinis or the Shoe Leather Express, those are only as good as the quality of the material. So get some sneakers that are going to hold up, or get some Merrells, get something that's going to actually hold up. If you're really stuck on what to do there, you can always go to an Army surplus store and pick up a brand new pair of combat boots. Just break them in. It's really simple to do. And then knowing where you are, how important is a paper map of your kind of area whenever you're out and about or traveling. If it's someplace you've been 500 times, probably not that big of a deal. But if it's someplace new, you probably want to know where you are.
Yeah, 100%. The feet thing, having good shoes. I mean, I know you like to wear nice high heels when you go on date night. I do too. But you know what? Like, you can't walk in those things. So I always have a spare pair of broken in boots in the back of my car. They're next to the bug out bag, and not just going and buying that brand new pair of combat boots and saying, yep, when I need them, they're there in the back of the car and I can get home, but breaking those in so you're not just, total princess blister when you put those things on for the first time.
Absolutely. And, maybe time to throw some moleskin or something like that into your bug out bag and actually practice walking
100%.
a little bit.
Dude, the moleskin little patchy things, those, I have a pack of all the different shapes and sizes of those. Those go in all my backpacking gear, and then obviously in my get home bag, because you're exactly right that most of us just don't go walk 20 or 30 or 40 miles every day. And that first time you have to, and you probably aren't going to be in the right outfit and the right clothes for it. But yeah, having that pair of boots and the little moleskin patches for when the blisters do show up. Yeah, man, that's just absolutely huge. So the other thing when we're talking about sort of the fitness and safety aspect is I do want to have you give us a little bit of the safety and maybe a legality brief, because we are talking about things that could be dangerous and places that could be considered trespassing or breaking and entering. So we're talking about a bug out scenario. We're talking about a without rule of law type scenario. So I think you should give it a little bit brief. But remember, recently we did get a little hate on the safety brief. I don't know.
We
Some people,
did.
and it was just one person, so it's not like everybody. I appreciate it. I think for me, whenever I go to the range or whenever I go on an operation with an agency, there's always the brief. There is always the safety brief where you always level set, you bring it back to zero. And I appreciate that personally. And I'm not like a super safe person. I mean, I have a flamethrower, but I do appreciate just that. Let's be safe and let's do things legally until we can't.
Yes. And for the sake of this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Um, but yes, you do need to know where you are. You need to pay attention to trespassing signs. God help you if you trespass onto an active military installation and just ignore all of their signage because they just shoot to kill. So you could find yourself in a lot of hot water very quickly if you're not paying attention to your surroundings and knowing what you can and cannot walk across. You also have to watch for traffic in a lot of these scenarios and not just vehicle traffic. You need to watch for all sorts of different traffic. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that, but definitely be safe. Don't do anything that's going to get you into trouble while the rule of law still exists.
Yeah, good call. So where are we going to start? Let's go back and forth with these. Where do you want to start, Chris?
I want to start someplace where, everybody can go with rule of law in place. Published hiking trails. There's not a single really definitive count for all of the published hiking trails in North America, but the US has over 130,000 miles of actual trails and then like 1,300 designated national recreation trails. And California has this huge, extensive trail network in the US with more than 13,000 documented trails. Some of them are straight shots, some of them go up and down, some of them weave back and forth. And, I remember the 13-mile bar trail to go from the base of Colorado Springs, or I guess Manitou Springs, Colorado, up to the top of Pikes Peak. We used to do that for PT. That sucked. But there are a whole bunch of trails that you can go out and practice on. And if you need to, you can use them as escape routes. If you look up the United States National Trails System, it includes over 88,000 miles of trails, and it's comprised of different types. There's like national scenic trails, and those are kind of your longer ones like the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail. There's national historic trails. There's national recreation trails. There's finding trails. There's all kinds of different things that you can do to locate a place to practice and understand that this could be a valid bug out or escape route if you had to. For those looking to explore trails, the National Trails System site in the US or platforms like All Trails or even Onyx can help you discover specific paths and keep you from getting lost, especially Onyx because of the GPS quality. But go out, explore nature, and understand that this is something that you could use as a tool while you're practicing and getting fit.
Yeah, that's a great point that you can use these not just to bug out and get home, but yeah, to explore nature a little bit and get in good shape. But then just knowing where those hiking trails are in your area. So if the road is closed and you need to get home, or if some other alternate route is closed, you say, "Hey, I know there is a hiking trail here that will eventually get me where I need to go." That's huge. Another big one is old logging roads and old fire roads. This is crazy because a lot of these used to be on maps because they were logging roads, they were fire roads, and then they aren't anymore. So you can buy old maps. I have some old maps I've purchased of my county, and I got them on eBay for a steal, that have these old logging roads that I kind of knew existed. Like, you drive by an area and you'd see like an old gate or something, and you go, you know what? I don't know where that road goes. That must just belong to one of the logging companies. But then when you look at it on a map, you go, oh, this is an actual old road that now became a logging road. And I did something. I have a Garmin eTrex, like their little GPS thing. and just a little handheld one. But I went and bought the Garmin CD-ROM for eTrex, and it's from like 2006, and it has all these old roads and trails on it that aren't there
That's
anymore.
wild.
Yeah, and this is something I'll give Garmin a shout out, man. I don't work for Garmin. I have nothing to do with Garmin, but something that company does really well is that all of like their old stuff and their new stuff talk to each other. Like you get a piece of Garmin mapping software and you take that out of your little handheld geocaching uh GPS unit, you can shove that in their marine unit and it goes, yeah, I can see all those waypoints. Like they just do a really good job of that for some reason. But yeah, I bought an old Garmin CD-ROM on eBay from 2006 and it's got all these old Forest Service roads and stuff that don't exist anymore. They've been, uh, they'll either gate them or they'll tank trap them a lot, right? They'll just take a big bulldozer,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
you know what I mean? They take a backhoe and they just gut it out and make it so a car can't get there. And they go, yep, this is no longer a road, and those roads exist. There are some other places to get those. You can find old logging roads using maps from things like USGS or Forest Service, which may show historical roads. Obviously, using digital mapping apps that have a historical or topographic layer, you can usually find some of that old stuff. Yeah, USGS does a great job, and you should just go to I think it's USGS store. You can find that, and you can find a lot of the old logging roads. There's also a few Forest Service places, and if you want to get really crazy, you can just go to the Library of Congress and search historic maps, and they have a digital collection of historic maps, and you can find old stuff. I'm not kidding, which is really cool.
I doubt they have your Garmin CD-ROM there.
They probably do not yet. Someday they will. Someday we will be that old. But no,
Which, talking about that, that's standardizing your preps for future use.
100%. Yeah, if you're like a Garmin guy and you use their mapping systems, then obviously that map set will work. And Garmin works with Onyx as well. And I know you talked a little bit about Onyx. Onyx Maps, it's a great app, and they include various layers of data, which I like. So you can turn on topographic, you can turn on like motorized vehicle use maps on there and find everything. Another really cool one that I found, and I'd never found this app before, and it's amazing. It's called Avenza, Avenza, and we'll post links to this obviously on our website. But you can download older free historical USGS maps, and then if you want like all the cool layers they offer, I think it's pretty expensive, like $35 a year. Which, if you're an Onyx user, that's not a lot of money. But if you're like a guy like me that spends 99 cents on an app, that's a decent amount of money. But they have just amazing layers of all kinds of different map info, and one of them is these old roads that may not exist anymore. So I thought that was really cool. And you can find these. I find some stuff in my area. I live kind of in the forest, so there are things that I can find that maybe people in the city can't. But looking for road like features, so there are some tips and tricks there, like searching for parallel lines of older trees separated by a flat area with younger trees. Um, that could be an old road, or old bridges and streams. There's actually an old railroad tunnel out by me that I found that uh, it was a railroad that they tore up. It's gone. And then there's a hiking trail that kind of installed in where the railroad used to be. But there is um, it was kind of a mythical thing that a lot of people like claimed existed, and we had to go find it. But there is an actual tunnel through one of the mountains that was part of this old railroad system. So a lot of this old stuff still exists. You can usually find, especially in the logging areas, you can find old discarded machinery. There's a lot of stuff they just didn't take with them when it stopped working. And if you find like these old parts of skidders and stuff, chances are you're by an old logging road because it got there somewhere. So that's another big one. But yeah, all the forest logging roads and fire roads, there's a lot of those that just don't exist on maps anymore, but they are still completely navigable. You could actually walk on these still, but they're just off the maps now.
And it's important to note that you should be looking, either scouting ahead on paper or scouting ahead in person, because you may end up on a logging road that just leads you 180 degrees back where you came from. It just does a big loop. So
Right.
if you're trying to get away from someplace, make sure you grab one that goes the direction that you want to go.
Knowing where these are now, knowing where these are and where they go now is really going to come in handy later if you actually need them and you don't have time to just go exploring.
Now, you brought it up, train tracks. And when we were talking with Alex, he told us about how you can drive a four-wheel drive vehicle over train tracks. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but you can do it. And they have bridges that you can't access any other way. You can find where train tracks lead using online mapping tools or dedicated railroad apps. Train tracks to me are an underrated resource, but a railhead, even if no one is around, a railhead is a very dangerous place to be. So if you're going to walk the train tracks and have to keep an eye out for train traffic, or if you're trying to drive down the train tracks, know where they go and know where that next railhead is going to be, because you very, very easily could catch a tire or catch your ankle in a switch track and you're done. But you can use, government or railroad company websites to figure out exactly where railroads lead. Google Maps and Google Earth are actually very useful for visually tracking lines and then using Street View to kind of see those junctions and crossings, also known as access points for you if you are going to drive it. So you can use your resources there, but more specialized things like Open Railway Map or apps like the Rail Guide provide more detailed information. And then there's official sources, the Federal Railroad Administration or the FRA. So there's the FRA Geographic Information System, or you can also get individual railway maps from a company like BNSF or Union Pacific, and they'll offer data on active and abandoned lines. So when you're looking at using one of these, like for instance, openrailwaymap.org, it's a website that's dedicated to railroad lines and it displays a wide range of information, including active and abandoned lines, different railroad districts, even specific track and platform numbers. Maybe take a look at that so that you have that contingency or emergency way out, and you can set up a secondary rally point. Hey, we can't make the highway, so we're going to meet you at uh platform 8 in Kansas City.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
that's a really good call. And what about those little, what are they called? Like the hand carts, like the little hand pumpy ones that go on the train track. What are those called?
If I could find a railroad handcart,
How cool would
I
that be?
I would totally fix that thing up and have it ready to
That
go.
that would be awesome. And do you remember it was one of the Lethal Weapons? It was whichever one Joe Pesci was in. I want to say it might have been Lethal Weapon 3.
I
And
think it was
it
3.
and in that one, like the bad guy got away because he had one of those trucks that had the train wheel things that came out of the bottom of it, and he just drove onto the train tracks.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
one of the
yeah, yeah.
maintenance trucks or whatever. I don't even know what is the thing called that connects to the train track from the train? The wheel, the train.
So I actually interned for Union Pacific for a little bit.
No kidding, really.
And most of what I did was data entry. Every once in a while, when there was a train accident, I had to go out and see like what it was doing. Train axles are, depending on the actual car, but the coal cars that this happened on, the train axle itself was 9 inches diameter
Oh
of
my
solid
gosh.
steel.
Huge.
Every once in a while, when the train tracks get hot enough, because there's so much weight from those trains, and if you watch a train travel down the tracks at close range, you can actually watch the train track itself go up and down and heave and breathe. But when they get too hot, every once in a while, a wheel will s- basically spot weld onto the track, and it'll snap the axle, and then the next wheel that's coming behind it bumps it and pops it off. And so you have this almost 3,000-pound train wheel now moving off the track at 60 miles an hour.
No kidding.
It'll
Like a
cut a car engine in half.
Oh my god. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking now that one of those like a retired train maintenance vehicle, one of those trucks that has like the train, axles that fold out of it. That'd be an amazing bug out vehicle.
It would. The problem is they're heavy and they're not very fuel efficient.
Right, it's super heavy, right? Once you put those 2 big giant axles on it that will extend down, and then they have to have enough power to lift the entire truck up off of its own wheels, right?
They don't lift very far. It's only about an inch and a half. But yeah, they've got to be able to lift the whole thing
Yeah.
and then connect to their drive shaft. So they
Oh, yeah.
are a little bit awkward. One of the interesting things about trains that I learned while I was working for Union Pacific is train tracks are the width of 2 rear ends of horses. So the width of 2 horses' asses, because that's what wagons used to be.
Oh,
And so to keep the same gauge and make it so that wagons could travel along train tracks at the same rate, they built all of these train cars to the same width dimensions as wagons of the day, which those were based on 2 horses' asses right in your
that's
face as you're trying to go
that's
Pony
like
Express.
that's the most American thing I've heard today. They're like, "Hey, you could use a metric system. Let's make it say 1 meter apart." And we're like, "Nope, 2 horses' anuses." That's the unit of measure we're using because we will do anything to avoid the metric system. I like that. 2 horses'
2
anuses. Yep.
horse butts.
2 horse
So
butts. That's how wide it is.
you can use the rail system to navigate cross country quite literally from New York to San Francisco. You can just use the
Yeah.
Union Pacific rail system. And if you've got a vehicle that can handle it, better on you. If you've got to walk it, that's going to take some time, but it's still doable.
And in James Wesley Rawls' books, it's funny because people were sort of commuting on the rail system because in his post-apocalyptic world, when the whole society crashed, the trains were still operational longer than the the cars and the semi trucks and all the other ways you would get goods from one place to another because the trains just had a more established infrastructure. So the rail system was actually still working, and just a lot of people in his book series, a lot of people just kind of became, train jumping hobos for a little bit of time after the crunch, which was interesting. Um,
And
so
trains will run on just about any type of fuel that diesel
yeah,
engines
they're
will
diesel
work on.
electric, right?
Yeah, most of
Yeah.
them are basically a ported 2-cycle diesel engine.
I didn't know this was going to be a train episode. Here we are. We're just going to talk about trains. The other one, another great one, is power line easements. And most people can find these. There's going to be one by you, except in very, very densely populated urban areas. There's going to be a power line easement. And immediately out of your city, there's definitely going to be power line easements because that's how power gets to the city is via these easements of high tension, high power, big giant power lines that need to have a big cleared area where there's no trees, so they can't fall and they can't break the line, they can't catch fire and all that. So power line easements can serve as effective bug out routes, primarily because they're often just clear and they're continuous and they have this generally unobstructed path away from congested areas and urban areas. So it's nice because they just happen to avoid congested areas. The primary benefit of bugging out is avoiding main roads, right? So these are going to be packed with people and emergency vehicles and all kinds of stuff like that. The power line easements oftentimes will parallel these, but they will at least kind of get out of the city to the same general area. And they're this giant direct, long distance clear corridor because the utility companies need to have access to these. So it's not just about having them totally clear so there's no trees around to fall on the power lines and catch things on fire, but the utility companies need to have really, really easy access to these. So oftentimes you won't even encounter a gate. I've gone like off-roading down the power line easements before, and the roads are usually in pretty good shape along them because, again, the power line companies need to access them. So finding those power line easements by you, they really do make for very simple and easy navigation away from congested areas. And it's super easy navigation. Like clear cut in the landscape. It makes the route super simple to follow. And even with basic maps or at night, you're not going to get lost on a power line easement. They're pretty easy to find. In the airplane, they make really good like reporting points when you're flying and you're using visual reporting points. Train tracks are just a great navigation tool because they're just so easy to find from the air. They're these big cutout swaths and they go generally straight. They don't really make a whole lot of 90-degree corners, but they're just very easy to follow. So power line easements are a great one. Like I said, even with just basic maps or at night. And then they usually hum, so you could probably just kind of hear them.
Yeah, unless the
Yeah.
power is out, and then
Right.
it's going to be very, very quiet.
Right. Almost creepy quiet.
Yeah.
I don't like
And
thinking about it.
so
But finding those power line easements by you and knowing where you could get on one and then where they go, just huge because everybody else is going to be on the road. And even if that power line easement looks attractive to somebody, people that don't know where it goes aren't going to take it. So if you already know where that goes, then when that main road is clogged up, you're the guy just taking the right and headed out on that power line easement because you know where it's going to dump you out.
and the terrain can be pretty rough on some of those, but it's usually better cut than, you know, some roads I've seen.
Yeah, it's going to be like off-road vehicle type road usually, but again, the power line companies, they need to access it. So it's not going to be something you can usually take pretty easily in a Honda Civic, but in a four-wheel drive, it's generally going to be passable.
This is where I would say if you have a friend who has a dirt bike and is willing to let you use it, learn how to ride a dirt bike just to navigate those channels and those easements a little bit easier. And the one downside is they usually don't have bridges over water. There's
Right.
no anything there. So you may have to figure out a way to traverse water.
Right, canyons and ravines and stuff too, because they'll just go across them. Those easements, they don't need to continue down into gullies. They will just go straight across them. So having a dirt bike with like a hang glider attachment would probably be ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty sick.
Yeah.
My
Actually-
bug out vehicle can fly. My bug out vehicle can fly and do sweet tricks.
Yeah.
Speaking of water, one of the other places that you can use for an emergency bug out is urban drainage systems. Like the one that I can think of is the Los Angeles River. I mean, there's plenty of these all over, so you just need to find out where they lead. But urban drainage systems, similar to the LA River, they're channelized concrete storm drains, and they exist in many large cities and metropolitan areas that have experienced significant flooding as part of their development. So while the LA River is a prime example, other cities have pretty extensive concrete channels and storm drain systems. Phoenix, Houston, New Orleans, they've all got tunnel systems under them. And those drainage routes, they lead out into the Gulf or down into the nearest river. And when you're looking at those channelized systems, they can get a little confusing because you have inlets and outlets and inlets and outlets, and so you need to understand what your map is showing you. For instance, the city of Phoenix has a system of washes. They're natural drainage channels that have been engineered into these concrete line channels, but because they followed Mother Nature, they're not exactly straight. They meander and weave left and right. So you can get turned around pretty quick in there. The bayou and drainage network of Houston is mostly concrete lined. And New Orleans has this vast system of canals and drainage channels just because of the low-lying elevation and a history of flooding. We saw what happened with Katrina. They redesigned their entire flood drainage system after that. There's a lot of these systems in the Sun Belt, like Phoenix, Tucson, San Antonio, El Paso. Not so much in places like Nebraska or Iowa, where the soil will accept a lot more water. And while these systems and these channels can be used as bug out routes, they are designed primarily for flood control. And a lot of the time they're heavily polluted with urban and agricultural runoff. So you don't want to pick up any water If you're in New Jersey, you might have to watch for dirty needles or something like that, or homeless people that don't know that the end has happened.
So mean to Jersey.
It's Jersey, they can take it.
It's the Garden State, Chris.
Yes, a veritable garden of all of the needles. So, but actually, I've never been to New Jersey. I can't talk smack about it, but
No, I have. You're spot on.
but many of these systems are going to be patrolled by law enforcement, so you could find yourself in a little bit of trouble. Access is often restricted, so now we're talking about trespassing or illegal entry. So just be aware and model that into your pace model appropriately. Don't make that your primary because you might find yourself in a little bit over your head.
I was just thinking if you're somewhere that has these kinds of canals or drainage systems that usually do have some amount of water in them, this is where maybe having that save your inflatable raft as part of your preps would be nice if, the highways are
Oh,
totally,
yeah.
totally clogged up. I saw some dudes on Shark Tank not too long ago that made a kayak that turns into a backpack. Or
That's
actually, I guess it's a
cool.
backpack that turns into a kayak. It'd be kind of silly to have a kayak that turned into your daily backpack. It's the other way around. But you know what I mean? Like they had a backpack that you could just unfold and it zipped up and it was watertight and it was this little kayak. So you could hike with it and you could hike on, single track trail. And then if you got to something like this, some kind of drainage ditch or canal, you would have a mode of transportation in this little backpack kayak. But maybe the little inflatable raft as well would be something to add to your preps if you are somewhere that has a drainage system like this that could be navigable in an SHTF situation.
Yeah, and that would make it a lot easier to carry all of your gear. I mean, even if it's not deep enough that you can, really get into it with your gear, you can load your gear up and just tow it all the way down the river while you're on the side of the bank.
Well, that's a really good idea. Like a little pachyderm, like your little
Yeah,
mule.
you become your own little mule unless you've got
Yeah,
5 dogs that are willing to put on harnesses and help pull.
right. That's
Ding,
a
ding, ding.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, that beats the, remember in Walking Dead where Michonne had the zombies that were her little pack
Huh?
she's, like, cut their jaws and their arms off so they couldn't get her, and then she just put backpacks on them.
Yep.
So barring
That's
that, the little backpack kayak thing would be awesome for that. Just put your gear in it, and you can just tow it along from the bank.
yeah, I'm digging it.
That's a great idea. One other one to talk about is like the kind of subway tunnel stuff. In many cities, there's not just the subway tunnels, but there's like subway maintenance tunnels. So, underground like city tunnels and it's amazing how many cities there are in the US actually have some kind of subway system. There's between 11 and 14 major cities in the US with a subway system depending on what you call a subway, because like in Jersey, they have like the Patco and the Path lines that are just trains that have really long tunnels. And so someone decides that now I don't know if there's some like, if Big Subway decides that you're vested in the Subway Guild and you get to call yourself a subway once your tunnel gets long enough. I don't know, but
Know what sandwiches had to do with this, but
yeah. But you get it. So yeah, like New York City, obviously, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Boston, Philly, L.A. There's other subway systems or significant underground sections of trains, like in Atlanta or San Francisco with the BART line, Baltimore. So that kind of stuff. But knowing where those subway lines actually go is huge. I think a lot of people just sort of go, yeah, I get on the subway and then I get off the subway when the door opens. If you want to use that as an emergency bug out route, if you're in one of those areas or you travel to one of those areas, or even if you're not planning on using that as a bug out route, but if you commute on that and the train dies or the power goes out, knowing kind of where you are under the city could be very valuable, just kind of knowing where those are. So, that's just something to think about if you go to any of these places. And then there's obviously the maintenance tunnels. So, a lot of these subway tunnels have a parallel tunnel where they will store an extra train if one goes down, or where they have maintenance gear and where there's access to the above world. So, there's lots of places to access a subway besides just the published subway stops and platforms. And then there's some really famous, like secret subways. And the most famous one that I have ever heard of is what they call Track 61. And it's under the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, which is an amazing hotel. I have stayed there before. It's awesome. But President Franklin Roosevelt had a secret subway built on a secret subway track so he could get in and out of the Waldorf Astoria without anybody knowing he had polio.
That checks. I mean,
Ki-
create the FBI, create a secret railway.
Right, right. Yeah, we don't want to go down that path, but I'm just saying that, if you told me that FDR turned the frogs gay, I'd believe you.
Well, I guess it was Hoover that created the FBI.
Hoover did the FBI, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what else FDR did. He gave us the 40-hour work week. I'm not exactly sure, but he did have polio, and he was involved in World War II. But yeah, so basically, this Track 61 is just kind of cool, I thought, because he had a secret, bug out tunnel, and he had his own subway car there. So if something happened when the president was in New York City, that was his way to bug out, is he could sneak into this uh, underground secret Track 61 and get into the subway system. So that's kind of a cool one that I'm sure more things like that exist. It's not just the secret private elevator down to the secret subway on the secret track that gets you to the subway system, but there are other things like that. So knowing in your area or areas that you're going to travel where those subway lines go can just really give you some peace of mind. And in a bug out situation, they could mean the difference between life and death. Just knowing where they are and where they go, I think is just really important.
And along those lines of knowing where they are and where they go, tunnels, we're talking sewers too, and it's a really tricky one to find walking sewers with maps. If you talk to anybody who went down under Paris down into the catacombs, there have been people that have gotten lost and never found down there. So you can travel sewer systems if they're walking sewers, but generally speaking, maps aren't going to be super available. Your local public works department, they have engineering maps that exist.
Yeah,
Whether they will
sure.
give them to you is a
Yeah.
totally different question. But something else that you can get access to as far as underground tunnels, what about speakeasy tunnels? Because I know Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, even Kansas, Ellenwood, Kansas has speakeasy tunnels that were Prohibition era smuggling and illicit activity tunnels. Um, and a lot of modern speakeasy style bars are found above ground in places like Chicago that still have those active tunnels down there.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a good point because I've been to a few of them in Portland. Uh, it's called the Shanghai Tunnel Tour you can do. And yeah, that was earlier than Prohibition. It was actually, I think, early 1900s, late 1800s when people didn't want to serve on boats. They didn't want to be sailors. And so the bars would have these like secret tunnels and they would kidnap people. So you'd be drinking at a bar and then you'd wake up on a boat and they'd just be like, "You work here now." And it was these Shanghai tunnels in Portland, and they got Shanghaied. That's where that word Shanghaied came from, was from the Shanghai tunnels in Portland. And I think there are similar tunnels like that in Seattle that provided access to the waterfront. But you're right, the speakeasy stuff too. A lot of those towns, Rapid City, South Dakota is one I've been to where there is a speakeasy underground and there was a kind of secret tunnel network. And I think it was for like the Chinese immigrants that had built the town. They didn't want to see them above ground. So they ended up kind of having their own little secret underground town. And those tunnels in some places still do exist. So I think you're right that it'd be hard to find where those tunnel systems and the underground tunnel networks and sewers exist. It'd be tough to do, but if there is a way to find out where those are in your area, that definitely could provide a really cool bug out route to get home. And you might encounter mutant ninja turtles down there.
You might,
That
but
could be.
around here in Tennessee, they're all moonshiner tunnels.
Oh, interesting. So that was that was prohibition or pre-prohibition moonshine stuff?
Pre-prohibition, there were some buildings and cotton factories that they would uh, have tunnels where they could go from the cotton factory and get it down onto the Mississippi River through the bluffs without having to go over surface streets. So they had almost like a mine shaft cart full of cotton. But during the Prohibition, a lot of moonshiners, they would have their stills off of their property and then they would tunnel and all the way really up through the 60s, they were still building them. So they're all over the place. You just have to know where to look. There are no official maps, as far as I'm aware, of where the moonshine tunnels go.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, Ellenwood, Kansas. That surprises me. I don't even know actually where that town is within Kansas, but according to the internet, that town has a famous tunnel system that connects to a current speakeasy bar, and it's called the Underground. It's underneath the historic Wolf Hotel in Ellenwood. So there is like a little secret tunnel network down there, and then Salinas, California, apparently has tunnels underneath its old town that again was used for speakeasies during the Prohibition era. So that's kind of cool. There's a lot of these that I think are Prohibition era, and then there were a lot just during the westward expansion where we brought in a lot of immigrants, and they ended up sort of living underground and having their own little city systems because they didn't speak the language and people didn't want to see them. So they just had their own little secret underground tunnel network. And now there's just a lot of those that have been preserved. So knowing where those are in your area or an area where you're going to be, I think just can be a valuable piece of information to have.
I would say so too. Should we talk about some honorable mentions that, they might work, but they might be a little too risky to manage?
Yeah. What do you got?
I'm going to start with creeks, rivers, and streams,
Okay.
even a dry creek bed, because if you are in the Southwest traveling along a dry creek bed, it can rain 20 miles away and you'll get a flash flood where you are if you're downstream. And you may not have time to get out of the path if you're down in a dry creek bed with 10-foot walls on the sides. You could be in trouble. So if you're going to travel along a creek bed or a river or a stream, travel along the bank as much as you can instead of down in the actual channel. And then something that almost every city has is an alley system, kind of between houses that normally back up to each other. Some of them you can walk through, some of them you can drive a car through, some of them are delivery alleys and commercial designated, but you don't have to go all the way around the block in order to walk to the other side of the block that you're trying to get to. You can cut through. This one, I mean, they call them back alleys for a reason. There may or may not be predators in people form along those
Sure.
alleyways.
But
So you
knowing
just
where
have to
they
be
are,
careful.
knowing where they are is absolutely valuable. Yeah, the like creeks, river, streams thing is interesting because generally speaking, they all go down, right? For the most part, if you follow one, it will eventually lead to bigger and bigger bodies of water, and it will eventually go down in elevation. And I think some exceptions to that might be like in the Dakotas. I last year I flew myself cross country and at a fairly low altitude, just a couple thousand feet over the ground, so you could really see what was going on, and you understand why they called it the Badlands because it looks like these little, nooks and crannies and river and stream systems that just sort of go nowhere. And this is something we could probably talk to our friend the outlaw Jack Davis about. But in the Badlands, back in the day, the Native Americans, they would run the settlers into the Badlands and they'd get kind of lost in these what looked like rivers and streams, but they just never go anywhere. They would just go into canyons and stop, and you could just get lost and die in there. So really crazy. You generally think the river and a stream system will lead to uh, bigger bodies of water. There's sometimes when that just isn't the case. But knowing that, obviously, that's what we're saying is knowing that beforehand, knowing where those little tiny creeks and rivers and streams are going to go. can be super valuable in your area. And then one uh, that I have found myself exploring down south. This is big in Louisiana, but I'm sure there's stuff like this in Texas as well. But they have oil field routes, and there are physical pathways for transporting oil and gas, like from a production site to a processing facility or a refinery or even consumers, that are wholly owned by the oil company. So they have these whole like networks of like roads and things like that that we don't have access to, but they do have these road systems, these oil field routes to move the oil around. And down south, because there's nothing down there, a lot of these oil companies have, they call them camps. You and I would call it like a cabin or something, but they have camps, and there are uh, generally well stocked areas where the workers will stay or live just because they're so far from stuff. So a lot of these transmission pipelines and oil networks, the systems that the oil refineries have set up, there are generally some pretty big routes, including these like physical transporting pathways to get uh, oil from one place to another that the public generally just doesn't have access to. So if you have a friend who's an oil field worker, it may be nice to lean on them and kind of know where these alternate routes are, because the oil companies, they don't want to be at the whim of the highway network system. So they kind of have their own.
And that would also provide a overnight shelter for you or bivouac site
For sure.
with I'm assuming if it's in decent condition because the oil workers were living there, you're going to have a clean roof or a solid roof over your head. You're going to have some sort of heat, some sort of food or water supply emergency stash around. So
Right.
that could be a very good spot for a rally point.
Yeah, 100%. And you can see those, it's flat, so you can see them for a long ways away. It may be a really good rally point. So knowing where some of those are would be huge. And then obviously the small municipal airport system. Now, I'm not saying go steal an airplane, but I am saying that there are very small municipal airports all over the country. I want to say there's like 2,500 of them maybe in the United States. I want to say it's something like 2,500 general aviation use airports. There's probably airplanes. If there's not just airplanes there, a lot of these have like courtesy cars. Very common for a small municipal airport to have a car with the with the keys in it that are specifically there for pilots who fly in and want to borrow the car. And this happens all the time. I mean, I've flown to just some towns you've never heard of where you land and there's an office that is either unlocked or there's a code on the door and it's going to be the frequency that the airport uses, which is 99% of the time going to be 1228 or 1229. And if you use that code, you can generally get into the office and there's oftentimes showers there, there's food and water, and it's all honor system stuff. So I'm not saying go like break into FBOs at airports, but if we are in a situation where there's no rule of law, that is a very good way to, if you need to hunker down for the night. And people just don't really think of those kinds of things unless you're in aviation. You probably don't think of that kind of stuff, but there are generally cars there. It's low security, it's honor system, and there's like keys for the cars, and there's gas.
We're going to have a bunch of listeners reporting back, I stole an F-16.
Yeah, there's gonna be like, the guys on this podcast told me to just go like steal a car, man. So I did. But yeah, it's funny. I'll tell you one short little story. A buddy of mine and me flew to Reno. We've done it a couple of times. On the way back, we encountered some weather, and there's a small municipal airport in Eastern California that we landed in, northeastern California. We landed in, and there were these like retired police cars. Like they were obviously police cars. And it was on a Sunday, so there's nobody working at the airport, and there was a phone number like on the office door. And as I'm dialing the phone number to figure out if there's a car we can borrow, I like hear the car behind me start up because my buddy just went and opened the door and found the keys in the sun visor where they always live. We just, I think we stole a cop car that day, but we filled it up with gas and we brought it back. And then the next morning the weather cleared and we took off. But yeah, that is very common in general aviation that there's a courtesy car. But just thinking about general aviation airports because they're generally off the beaten path, right? They don't just shove airports in the middle of a neighborhood usually. They're usually kind of out of town. So if you're traveling on one of those, you know, train track type things or a power line easement, you may find yourself close to municipal airport and there probably are warm places to sleep. There probably are uh, you know, good places with a roof over your head where other people won't think about that if you're in a bug out scenario.
See, that story is a lot different than the last time I stole a car and committed Grand Theft Auto.
Right. No, I don't think I don't know. It's a gray area, but I know that, we filled it up with gas, so we returned it and nothing ever happened.
If it works, it works. And
If it works, it works.
you're
So
not
it
in
worked.
cuffs. So
Right. And nothing bad happened.
that's fantastic.
Do you
So,
have any other honorable mentions you can think of?
I don't, because this is all we're starting with, contingency and emergency evacuations. This is not your primary or your alternate.
Right.
This is shit has hit the fan. You need to get out of town. So this is kind of exploring what other options you have besides just hopping in the car with, 3 kids, 2 dogs, a cat, and all of your stuff on the roof rack up top. This is you're potentially on foot, potentially using a bicycle or a dirt bike. If you are lucky enough to find a horse that is healthy enough to pull a cart, then you can do that. But these are all your contingency and emergency planning steps that you should be taking now.
And yeah, exactly. Knowing what they are, knowing what you're going to do, just knowing, hey, we're going to go downtown and we're going to go to dinner tonight. And if something happens and the road is blocked, I know 3 other ways to get home. That's the take home point here is that just think about the other ways that you can get back safely to your bug in location if your primary route and your alternate route happen to be blocked. And that's really the point of this episode is knowing all those other contingency and emergency routes to get yourself home safely.
Yep. And we're going to have a bunch of listeners that are doing some new boot goofing when they pick up new boots so they can brick them in.
That's right.
So,
Yeah. Go on a hoof, find a nature trail, buy some new boots. I really like the Reebok boots. The ones that I forget
haven't tried them on. I haven't tried them on.
they're actually issuing those in some units now. These Reebok branded boots. They're awesome. I'm really impressed with them. Like they're a real. I think it's the RBX line combat-y boot, but I'm pretty impressed with those. I have a broken in pair of those that's in the back of my vehicle.
I will have to check them out. But until next week, when we explore an entirely new topic, remember you are your own stakeholder, and we will see you then.